A brief agenda for our time this evening. And so in December 2022, the board authorized the consideration of a comprehensive plan amendment to update the countywide policy plan. This authorization included three major goals: to review, update, and streamline the existing elements, add new elements as needed, and ensure the policy plan is in alignment with the strategic plan and other county documents. Before we dive into the good stuff with Carly, I wanted to just set a framework for what the policy plan is and how it relates to some of our regulatory documents. Um, the comprehensive plan is a guide that sets the land use vision for the county and is implemented through the development review process of zoning applications. The policy plan includes goals, objectives, and policies. Goals provide the general direction of the plan. Objectives include statements to help achieve those goals. And finally, the policies include specific approaches for pursuing an objective. The policy plan applies countywide, and therefore it's important to ensure that the policies developed are general and flexible enough to apply across the county, but also targeted enough to address the issue we are working to improve. The area plan volumes of the comprehensive plan provide specific guidance and recommendations pertaining to development within specific areas of the county to ensure that development is addressing site-specific considerations. The zoning ordinance is a regulatory document that applies to all structures and is intended to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the public and to implement the comprehensive plan. And finally, the PFM provides the specific engineering guidelines for the development and construction of new development. With the project, we're currently in our second phase of outreach with our focus topic meetings. We're also working on some staff research that Carly will talk about more in a little bit. And then we will also be putting together a community feedback report that we'll be releasing early next year. That'll include all the feedback that we've received through this process and details of how it was incorporated. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Carly.
Good evening, everyone. Carly Aubrey. So I'm going to go through briefly, kind of start with what we have in the environment element right now, and then I'll go to kind of talk about how we use the plan, and then kind of get into what we're looking at as far as the update. So for the element right now, this is a list of the current objectives, and each objective contains numerous policies. And currently, the objectives and policies are categorized into three broad categories, which you can see grouped together on this slide. Objectives 1 through 5 are within the environmental pollution category, and then objectives 6, 7, and 8 assess environmental hazards, and objectives 9 through 13 look at environmental resources. And then there's also an appendix which provides guidance for tidal shoreline erosion control measures, and it emphasizes living shoreline approaches. And then the Chesapeake Bay Supplement is a document that's supplement to the entire plan, but it was adopted in 2004 to satisfy state comprehensive plan requirements of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. And it provides a detailed evaluation of water quality issues, and most, if not all, of the recommended policy statements in that document were subsequently adopted within the current policy plan that we have today. You go to the next slide. So how the environment element is used, for the most part, many of the environmental policies are implemented on a case-by-case basis as land is developed or redeveloped through the comprehensive plan amendment process, rezonings, or special exceptions, and that is for both private and public developments. And a commonly used objective and related policies is Objective 2, which pertains to water quality. And Objective 2 policies encourage the creation of and monitoring of best management practices programs, minimizing fertilizer, pesticide, and herbicide use. It encourages incorporation of low impact development techniques for stormwater management. It encourages meeting tree cover requirements through preservation and exceeding preservation code requirements. And it also encourages the protection and restoration of stream channels and buffer areas. And then another commonly used objective is Objective 13, which pertains to sustainable building and site design. And during the entitlement process, we typically see development projects commit to LEED or an equivalent program certification. And our policy on electric vehicle charging is another example of a policy that's routinely encouraged and committed to in the form of charging stations, infrastructure to install future stations, or a combination thereof. Go to the next slide. And then we also have objectives that are more like a broader county direction or endorses coordination efforts. One example is Objective 2, Policy M, which pertains to our watershed management plans. And those are prepared by the county's Department of Public Works and Environmental Services. And they provide recommended actions to protect property, prevent erosion, reduce excess nutrients, and improve water quality. And we consult these plans along with DPW ES during the development review process. And then we also have policies supporting the establishment of open space and conservation easements. And that can happen as part of a development project or separately by private landowners. And those easements are held usually through either the Fairfax County Park Authority or sometimes the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. And then, yep, next slide. So just a couple of slides for how we sort of our policies in action. So commonly used environmental policies are those related to stormwater management and tree preservation and landscaping. And the objectives and policies within the environment element also share similar purposes with those in other elements in county plans. So depending on the type of project and its location, we can leverage certain policies to provide project features that have co-benefits. And this is an example of a recently approved project in McLean on Chainbridge Road. And it includes features that serve multiple purposes consistent with several policies, not just environment policies, but also transportation and recreation policies. So you can see pointed out on the left is urban bioretention planters adjacent to the building to capture stormwater runoff from the roof, which then drains to an underground detention vault, which is shown in the light gray squares, and that will be under a public park space area. And that's consistent with stormwater policies in the environment and parks and recreation elements by providing park space while also employing site design and low impact development techniques. And then along the right, you see street trees, a sidewalk, and a bike lane. And these features are consistent with policies in the environment and transportation elements for providing multimodal transportation choices and street trees, which can lead to improved air quality. Go to the next slide. And then, as I mentioned earlier, commonly used policies are related to green building and sustainable site design. So these just a couple pictures from the Capital One building in Tyson's up on the roof of one of the buildings, and it includes the green roof areas that provide stormwater management benefits as well as recreational amenities. And next slide. 1 second. So generally speaking, what we found is that the environment element is pretty good. It contains a lot of effective objectives and policies that are incorporated into development plans and provide appropriate direction for county efforts. But we have identified some areas where there is room for improvement or the scope of an objective and policy could be broadened, or where environmental concerns have risen to the forefront since the last policy plan update. And the list on this slide are not meant to be complete since we are continuing our research efforts and our outreach efforts and are seeking input. So I'm just going to highlight just a few of these so we can have time for discussion. But so for stormwater management, we have a pretty robust policy for stormwater, but it could be improved to better promote the potential benefits that green infrastructure can provide, some of those co-benefits that was mentioned earlier. And then some recommendations that have been provided in development reviews or site-specific plan amendments could be formalized into policies, such as exceeding minimum code requirements for water quantity and quality control, salt management, and soil remediation. And then the current lighting policy is basically just focused on impacts to humans, but so that could and should be improved to consider impacts to wildlife. And same as the current soils policy is focused on soils that are problematic to development. And so a recognition of the importance of healthy soils for plant health, water infiltration, and biodiversity should be considered. And then on the right, the areas to address, the areas of resiliency, equity, and health are ones that are being evaluated across the board for all elements. And if you look at some of the policies, like we do have some that are there and do address these issues, but they're not, they could be a little bit more direct and obvious that that's what, that's one of the benefits that they have. So, and an example that listed here that is urban heat island effect. So that's an issue that has implications to each of these areas, but it's not directly addressed. We do have policies about street trees, but one potential way of addressing this is in the environment element is encouraging greater tree canopies in key areas, which could help address all three of these areas. So looking at areas, vulnerability maps that where there's not a lot of street trees, try to encourage more street trees in those areas to help address heat as well as equity and health. So I think next slide. So kind of a couple of questions to help kick off our discussion, but certainly not wanting to limit to these two. But so which topics are you aware that are not currently addressing the environment element that should be addressed? And then going back to that slide about the three main groups that we have our policies kind of categorized in now, are there any thoughts on if these three categories should be adjusted? So kind of with that, I think we can open it up for questions, comments. I did see a comment in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a question about what climate resiliency means, which is, probably fair to define that term.
So we've had a lot of work from our Office of Energy and Environment, or Environment and Energy. I see a couple of people on here that are from that office, but they've prepared Resilient Fairfax and as well as CCAP, the Community Action Plan. So climate resiliency is, in a nutshell, trying to simply, you can probably go on about it, but making sure that how we develop land or how sometimes when we restore it, that it can withstand future climate events, flooding, heat. I'm sure there's others. I'm blanking on others, but yeah, Office of Environmental Energy Coordination. Sorry, I always get them flipped. So let's see. I guess Larry was first.
So I guess I have a couple observations. One is that the way things are laid out, it's not clear to me which topics will actually be covered. And let me be a little bit more specific. Recently, EQUAC sent a list of issues that we think are important to this review to Mary Cortina. She is our contact with the Planning Commission's Environment Committee. And we think those are important issues to cover. But depending upon how the things are, how they're scoped and how they're explored, they may or may not be included. And even if they are included, then how do we know that they are being addressed in a manner that's consistent with the intent of the recommendation that we had to include it? So it seems like in order to have a plan that everyone can understand and get behind, we really need to see more specifics, more details, so that people can react to it. This is a very, very general level.
Understood. And part of the purpose of these meetings is to get the input from individuals, from boards like yourselves and general public, and get the documents that Corrine mentioned earlier, kind of the report out, and then that'll help us kind of formulate that overall list and see what are those can we address, are we going to address, or already addressed, et cetera, and then move forward with that into more of the research and actually policy writing that will start taking place later this year and early next year.
So just to be clear, one of the concerns I would have is that you're collecting information now. There's not been a lot of reaction, but then you're going to go into the writing phase, and I just wouldn't want the door to be closed on issues when it's not clear what's being addressed, at least not to me. And I'm asking because I think other people have that same question.
So in what format would you like to see these questions that you have addressed?
It could be in writing. It could be in a meeting. I think a meeting is probably better, because then you could have a dialogue. And if it's in writing, the writing may be a bit too terse to really understand that any communication gaps may have been missed. I think, and so the other thing I'm interested in doing is building agreement on the issues. And so I think by having that kind of dialogue, we could probably be effective in building agreement. That's what I'm looking for the community to get behind whatever action is taken and saying, yes, this makes sense. This is going to work. That's where I'm coming from.
Understood. Okay,
Yeah, and I think,
go to, sorry.
oh, sorry, I was just gonna, Carly did mention the community feedback report that I mentioned earlier. So this isn't the last opportunity for feedback. We have a bunch of outreach opportunities and engagement forthcoming. So this is not the only or last opportunity for people to be engaged. But yes, understood. We've heard you. Thank you for the feedback.
I think I'll go to Noel.
All right, I have a couple of major areas I'm interested in pursuing. First, in regard to the questions on this slide, it's maybe not quite ripe to be asking these questions in this forum, particularly since you haven't addressed comprehensively what's in the environmental element. People would have had to have done their homework ahead of time. I do like some of the ideas that you presented earlier in terms of possible areas for addition, and I can't offhand think of anything else, but and certainly in terms of the structure of the environmental pollution hazards and resources, maybe that'll work, maybe it won't. I think until you kind of flesh out some of these ideas, you won't really know that. And so I'm not, I think that's a pretty comprehensive way to divide things up, but I may be missing something, and it may really become clear to you as you start to try to, work new ideas into the context that we already have. So not sure if those are really the critical questions to be asking right now. The second area I want to explore a little bit was there were policy areas that you did not identify, some of which you really don't need to raise. You've already gone through noise and that policy was destroyed, so not much you can do with that. I was surprised that you didn't say anything about the environmental quality corridor policy, although one of your slides did refer to biodiversity and wildlife corridors. I kind of view that as sort of one of the central environmental policies we have in the county. And I know that there's been some concern about the complexity of the policy. Is there a need to streamline it and so on and so forth? And I'm a little nervous, as you know, about where this all might be going. I think making changes and finding better ways to present the concepts that are in there, wonderful. I think that's great. Every policy can benefit from that kind of scrutiny. But we shouldn't weaken the policy if it serves the effect of simplifying it. There's some complexity in there in terms of buffer widths and things like that, and it might not be the best way to go about doing that. There may be better ways, but we shouldn't lose sight of what we're trying to accomplish. And so I'd like to offer a challenge on that particular policy to everybody who's involved in this effort. The EQC policy begins with a statement of the purposes of the policy. There are several things the policy is intended to do. My view is that any change that is proposed to the EQC policy ought to serve those purposes positively. So you should be asking the question every time you're looking at a change to that policy, is this enhancing those purposes or is it not? And that's the challenge I offer. That's the lens that I'll be looking at the proposals within. And so I would hope that we could build positively on a very good policy that, maybe could stand for some improvement and some streamlining. But let's just do it in a positive way and make sure we're focusing on that. That's all I have right now. I am interested in, I assume later on you'll talk more about the iterative process through which these things will be released and when time might be available for us to respond to something and how that will work. I'm also very interested in that. Thanks. And certainly if you have any questions of my comments, let's have a conversation.
Yeah, as far as, the EQC policy is a good one and an essential one. So I don't know how much tweaking they will be doing or shortening or anything like that. That's still something we need to look at. I think it has a lot of good things that I would actually like to see apply more broad.
If you leave it alone, I'll be happy. But I've heard in previous meetings that there are some concerns about it, and I left those meetings feeling a little nervous. But if you think it's great the way it is, I think it's a very good policy. Maybe with a focus on biodiversity and wildlife corridors, maybe there's a way of even improving it and folding it into some of the other ideas. But I just don't want it to be weakened in the name of streamlining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same here. I think there is hold on, sorry. I think it's Elaine was next.
Yeah, I have a specific area of something I've been trying to figure out where it gets inserted. So when I saw earlier you had a bullet that talked about air quality, you have a bullet here that talks about environmental pollution and one about environmental hazards. I'm trying to understand if the focus is like not putting pollution into, say, the rivers or the air or the whatever, or how it interacts with how what we have going on is a pollution to the people breathing it. I'm not sure if I belong in the health area or if I belong in the environmental area. And I'll tell you the specific one I'm really concerned about right now is gas stations. They don't have even vapor recovery nozzles on them around here. I can't even remember a time in California we didn't have them, and I've lived here for like 25 years. But just those fumes that are coming off of gas stations and the sensitivity we should be having, the CDC has it on their website. You shouldn't even let your kids play next to a gas station. And yet we are building apartment complexes abutting and across the street from gas stations. And so I'm trying to figure out where's this overall policy about taking a look at where we put people next to environmental, I'd call them hazards, but I don't know if it fits in that category of your hazard or not, but where does that get regulated? What gets built next to what? Why it's a problem?
So I can take a stab at that one. I think you've been in the right place. I saw your name on a few of the other meetings. I think this is a topic that touches multiple areas. And so we I've taken a note about it. We're aware of this in the environment element, and we've been talking about this internally for a bit now, just about um, how to handle this. So I know I can convey this to our equity team as well and our health team, and we do have some health meetings coming up. I think next week. And so I will also relay this to them, and we'll work together as a team to see if there is a way to see if there is a way to address it. Carly, I don't know if I stole your thunder or not, but
No, yeah,
Yeah, I
that
think
was,
it's really an issue because he answers back, well, we've got places like that. Well, but that doesn't mean it's okay. I mean, one time we thought smoking was okay. One time we thought the cars were okay, but we put catalytic converters and now we're trying to go to electric. So just because it's been done in the past doesn't mean it's okay. So thank you. Yeah, I'm going to be on those health meetings and I'm trying to hit all of these to get a better understanding of what's happening in each of the areas.
all right, thank you. Let's see, Renee or RG. I'm assuming that's Renee.
That is me. Thank you for holding this meeting, and good to see everybody here. I have two things, and then maybe just a third general comment that have just been on my mind. First is, I don't know where bird safe windows fall. When we were working on the data center zoning ordinance amendment, and I had been talked to really early on in the process, I mentioned that if the county was thinking about requiring windows in a building that has no need for windows, the least we could do was make sure that those were bird safe. And I was told, no, we can't do that. We need a policy about that. And so is this the place to have a policy about that? Is that in green buildings? Is that in,
yeah,
where is it?
that's a typical comment that we make in development reviews for rezonings and special exceptions, and we put it kind of under that green building umbrella. And so that's one thing we've talked about kind of formalizing, so to speak, because we don't really have a bird friendly policy right now, but we typically typically get commitments for it. And so getting something on the books about that is something that we're looking at.
That's good to know. So it'll be in the green building section if it gets added.
Most likely, yeah.
Okay. And then you did mention soil health. I did a quick skim of it, and it didn't look like that was currently in there, but I just had a discussion actually today with the Forest Conservation Branch, and that came up as a side topic about, what to do in development when sites get completely cleared and there's soil compaction. And there was a perspective that we shouldn't require developers to amend soil, and that tilling, has drawbacks and such, but that it's okay to just leave that compaction problem to homeowners and they should figure it out later. That did not sit well with me. I don't know that tilling or supplementing the soil is the right answer either, but I do think it would be great to kind of, I don't know that was flagged as one of your white paper things, but I do think if we want to set up our environment to be plantable and healthy in the future, then avoiding seriously compacted soils in construction sites would be a really great thing to add in here, and really thinking about soil health in that way. I know Arlington just recently instituted a new policy to add 24 inches of biochar and such to compacted soils. I know that there's also controversy about that, and maybe we don't want to go that far, but it should be a discussion that we should be having, I think, about where we want to go with that. And then in that vein, since you did ask the question of these three categories, what they fall into: environmental pollution, environmental hazards, and environmental resources. And I haven't looked at that in deeply enough to understand what each of those things are holding. But I wonder if just environmental health is a category, something that's more positive. Bird safe windows will be a healthier thing for the environment. Soil health will be a healthier thing. Is there a way to kind of frame this in a positive sense of really rehabbing our environment? Just an idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, the soil, it's not going to be a white paper, but it will be mentioned as sort of a subtopic, so to speak, within the stormwater management white paper, because obviously good soil makes for good infiltration. And then it also pertains to keeping healthy landscaping. So yeah, it's something we're looking at.
I think it's all health, which is part of the challenge. Everything in the policy plan is health. That's been my mantra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all connected.
But there may be a way to better draw that out. I agree with Renee.
Let's see. I'm going to go to Elaine and then Larry.
Yeah, Renee just said something about the data centers, and that triggers something because someone else mentioned about the noise regulations. Is noise part of environmental?
It is. There is a noise policy, but it pertains to transportation related noise on sensitive sources. So it's the noise
On sensitive
ordinance.
sources.
Yeah.
There's the problem, and we ran into this recently looking at what the regulations and the zoning or what, it's a whole different world of rules when you come to talking about what actually you have to do. But I think there should be something in the policies, whether it's this one or another one, but we should be looking at new development and thinking about what does it do to the quality of life. Because what I understood with those noise things with the data centers is that they are below a certain threshold, therefore it's okay. But there's a way big difference between my neighborhood right now, which is totally quiet, except for when the trains go by, because I do live on the train tracks. But that's very minimal, a few times a day, versus having a 24/7 buzz going on. So there should be something to say we're looking to not degrade the current levels of life, kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe it belongs in the land use planning. I'm not sure. It's my 2 bits about that one, because I couldn't handle if there was a constant buzzing coming out of my next door neighbor's property.
Mm-hmm.
Elaine, you may want to think about how you would define that. That's a big challenge with plan policy. Is if you're going to implement it, you have to define it. And that's a tough one.
Yes, I wouldn't disagree
and how to
with
enforce.
that. But if you don't even have a concept that you want to preserve it, you're not even going to get there. It's not even going to be discussed or defined.
Go to Larry.
So I'd like to give a reaction to a couple of the comments that were made. First, on the data centers and noise. So my understanding from Carmen Bishop, who's the deputy zoning administrator, or one of them, she indicated that the noise ordinance does apply to data centers. And the question is it adequate? And I think that's a fair question. It's not just transportation. And the noise with data centers can vary substantially, because when the data centers have to run on backup power from diesel generators, it will be much noisier than it would be for normal operations, which basically just have the air conditioning equipment operating. So, and that's, I think, the biggest concern people have. And I think quality of life is a good thing to look at. But just to give you an example of some of the importance of really getting into a bit more specificity on all of this, Renee was talking about soil, and she was talking about compaction. And when I read soil in your slides, I was actually thinking about pollution. You can have lead, you can have PFAS, you could have spilled gasoline, benzene, any number of other contaminants, which can be an issue for indoor vapor and other things. So I think it's really critical to have more specificity so that people can have an appreciation for being looked at. I really would love to do anything I could to engage with you further on this, because I really think you've gone to a lot of effort to go through this process, and you want it to be successful and well received. And if people don't understand what it is that you're doing, or that you've even researched the right things, then my fear is you may end up having to go back. That's what I just wanted to make that comment. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Well, first for the noise, the transportation, the noise policy and the environment element does pertain just to transportation noise on sensitive sources like residential, office, daycare, etc. It's the noise ordinance, which is in the county code, which regulates the noise that a use can produce, such as a data center or industrial. So it is confusing. It is two separate things. We are right now with the element limited and looking at impacts from transportation noise.
So just for clarity, sorry, are you saying that when you are reviewing a permit, you can't look at a data center? So in listening to Carmen, when she was explaining the data center ordinance, she said that that is something they specifically would look at, and they could turn them down if they haven't taken adequate steps to mitigate. So
through the noise ordinance, yes. Through the policy plan, right now with the current policy, no, because it's talking about transportation noise impacts.
Yeah, I think you need
Cars,
to
airplane.
expand that, given the number of data centers they want to bring into here. It comes up in the zoning is when the ordinance is looked at, is what she's talking about, not in the comprehensive planning section when we're deciding what kind of industry or what kind of housing to put in an area.
And data centers will be looked at as part of this. That was part of the January report that went to the board and part of the follow-on motion as for the zoning ordinance amendment. So that is something that we're looking at, putting policies in particular to data centers. So.
And EQAC did recommend that the county consider going back and reviewing its noise policies.
Mm-hmm.
Would those data center regulations be applied in the environment section, or would they be siloed to be data center land use, even though they might overlap with these kinds of policies?
Yeah, that's honestly, that's TBD. We're trying, once we get kind of a better grasp of the policies that we're thinking about, we can make that call. I think generally, it's generally been land use because it's a
I think you need to be careful in developing environmental policy to be too use specific. And I think the issue is it's too noisy. So the question is, well, what's limiting that noise impact? We have the noise ordinance, which applies. And if that still doesn't cover it, is there some fault in the noise ordinance that we could address case by case during the entitlement process through plan policy? And then what you probably want to do is look at the broader issue that there's something missing in the noise ordinance that we need to cover. And there may be another use out there that has the same concern. And so I would caution you against focusing particularly in the environment section on any one particular use and its impacts as opposed to the broader impact. And I think the question here is the noise ordinance sufficient, or do you need to augment it on a case-by-case basis with something that goes further? And if so, how do you define that? And do you have the authority to do that? So just my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do this.
All right. I don't know if anybody else has questions or comments or topics.
My question is really the schedule and timing. And this is for me personally, as well as a group called the Partnership for a Healthier Fairfax. You talked about the health section, and Anna Ricklin is involved with that and very much involved with the partnership. But, at some point we may want to bring someone in to give a briefing on what this is all about and what the partnership can do. And we want to make sure that we're on target with our own development of comments and the process through which that would happen, and then even the format. And so I'm not really getting a good sense about what that is. I know you put a slide up at the very beginning that talked about the overall schedule, but it was kind of hard to really see when do I, as an individual interested party, and when do groups who may need more lead time to develop things and get it through their respective leadership, need to really be focused on this and putting their things together. And I don't, kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, so we're doing this phase of outreach through December of this year, and we are continuing to collect feedback, and feedback is welcome in any format that a group would like
But
to
there's
provide
nothing
it.
really to respond to.
And so we are working on putting together a community feedback report in early next year where we'll also release draft plan guidance, and we can have that as our gut check of, did we get it right based on the feedback that we've received? And if there's still feedback at that point, it is welcome. We do also have a full outreach plan that is published on our webpage that goes into in depth about this. And we also have a project status document that does provide some additional details. So I do invite groups that are interested in providing feedback to take advantage of the materials that are on our webpage and reach out with any specific questions. And any sort of feedback is welcome. We've received emails, we've received, resolutions. It is all being accepted and collected. So I don't want the format of feedback to be what's holding people back.
Understood, but I think really things start happening when there's draft ideas out there to respond to. And I want to make sure that there's a sufficient amount of time provided between the date at which those drafts are released and the deadline for comments on those drafts, even if it's iterative and you have another round, more formalized round through the public hearing process. Often I found that there's not really a lot of time between the release of those drafts and the deadline, particularly when you look at larger groups that might meet monthly and may need to have several layers of review to get through to get their comments out. I don't really get a good sense of this. When would the draft language be out for review, and then how long would we have to review it?
Well, and we can, part of what we've done on our end is look at the current policies and kind of figure out like what's working, what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
What do other plans have?
That's great.
Or what are other efforts? So that's kind of the input that we're looking from others too,
Okay.
to take a look at what's on the books right now and
Mm-hmm.
what do you think works and doesn't work.
And I think you've identified some issues that are not in the plan now that probably should be. I commend you for that. It's just I think when we have something to react to in terms of specific proposals, that's I think you're going to get a lot more substantive input at that point, and people will kind of see how these new concepts are being folded in and if they're captured, and we'll see how the existing ones are being proposed for change, if at all. But there needs to be a sufficient amount of time for reaction to that. It's not just the proactive, here's what I think you need to put in there. It's okay, now you're going to come back and say, we've heard you, here's how we've captured your comments, and here's what we're going to do, and here's what we're proposing. And then we can say, well, yeah, you caught that appropriately, or maybe you kind of misunderstood what we were saying, or why are you doing that? There needs to be enough time to allow for people to kind of dive in and really make sense of it, and also take things through their whatever their group dynamic might be. And so if you have 1 or 2 months, that might not work, given the way some schedules are. I don't really have a sense of how that's going to work. I'm concerned because this partnership group I'm working on has kind of missed the ball a couple times because the schedule just got away from us. I have no problem responding as an individual in 2 days, but groups can't do that.
Thank you. It heard.
Okay, so is there going to be something that kind of identifies what that schedule is going to be in a more specific sense than what you presented tonight?
As we have more information and firm dates, we will release those. But right now, we're targeting early next year for release of this information. We are still very much in the middle of this outreach, and some of the feedback that we're receiving is shaping how we're forming the next steps. So
I appreciate
your
that.
feedback has been heard and noted.
Make sure there's enough time between when you release the drafts and you get the comments. So, okay, thanks.
Elaine and then Larry.
Yeah, I would just echo what Noel's saying, because I had the same reaction on the transportation meeting the other day. they were going through some just incredible stuff of how they're looking at all these other people's plans in other counties and other areas, and they're going to maybe take what they think is good. And I'm like, okay, but where do we really get to see what you decided so that we're weighing in on that? Because you don't necessarily need to go through with what you thought was good. You should get the community input. So that is a big problem. Making sure that we do understand. I know that when this whole effort first came out, this Plan Forward effort, they said you could sign up to get notified. And I signed up in various areas that I wanted to be notified of what's happening. I've never gotten an email saying, hey, we're getting ready to do this, or the environmental will be kicking off here, or anything like that. So it is a big problem. Even if you say you're going to have this information out there, is for people to understand it's come out. And to be notified, here, it's here now, and here's the next date we need input by. So I think there's a real gap where things just get posted on websites someplace, and unless you're watching it and looking for it, you'll miss it. And then lastly, when you talk about the schedule, I did notice where I went tonight to click on to come to here, there are a bunch of farmer markets listed. What's happening in those forums?
Yeah, so the farmers markets, we're just popping up at existing events and getting the word out to the community and people that are already there. So it's just one of our outreach mechanisms. It's not a formal meeting. We're just getting the word out there and trying to get community engagement involved. And to your point about the outreach, we've sent out a couple emails through the email blasts, and I think I've seen your name on some of the registrations. So I will connect with you offline to make sure that the email address that we have is the correct one. Because you should have gotten some notifications by now, but I will reach out to you separately.
I do remember getting one email the other day that said something about these meetings are taking place, like in general, but not anything. I remember signing up for specific areas of interest, and I haven't seen anything. So yes, thank you. But when you say we at the farmers market, do you mean we the county, or we the people doing environment?
We the project team. So we have like 2 people signed up for farmers market to hand out some flyers and get the word out and talk to people about the project and spread the word. So we've popped up at a couple back to school events so far, and we've been out getting the word out and talking with folks about the project and what they like about their community, what they see needs improvement. So it's just another mechanism for outreach.
So for the whole policy update, not in any specific topic area.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think it speaks to how the word's either not getting out or people don't care. But I've been on several of these meetings now, and if you have a handful, five or less people probably from the public showing up, it's very disappointing. That's not your fault, but it's just disappointing.
To build on that, Elaine, I think you're onto something about how to make this accessible to people. And I think having that specificity that people can react to could be helpful. I understand getting in early, but it's really hard to get people excited when it's just so globular.
I think we'll go to Larry.
So about a year ago, actually it was the end of September of last year, there was a meeting, joint meeting between EQUAC and the Environment Committee of the Planning Commission. And after that meeting, and we talked about this whole effort, and we heard the schedule. And so after that meeting, I had a discussion with some of the staff that were there. And my big comment was that people are better able to react to things that are specific that they about. And just a bit of background, I spent my career working at EPA, mostly formulating policy. And the only way that we were able to get good policies that are really durable, in my opinion, is you lay out a straw man. It has specificity. You can see where the impacts are. You can see where the benefits are. And then you have an open discussion about it. And then you try to build agreement about that. And that's what we did. That's a lot of work. But unless you have that kind of exchange, it's kind of hard to see that you're going to get the success that you want. It may not be durable. A lot of times there are lots of policies that are developed. I've seen at the state, at the federal, and other levels where they just don't have that kind of interaction, that kind of back and forth. And because of that, they're not durable. And they end up getting undermined or changed in no time at all. And that's not good for anybody, because then you have to go about changing the way things work. People kind of don't know what the rules are. It just makes it harder. So my interest really is in trying to get to the point where we can see the benefits and the issues. And the only way that you're going to really get a good feeling for that is by having specific discussions on specific topics that include the impacted stakeholders. And I agree with you that these meetings are great, that you're sharing things. It's a very open process, but the specificity is not there, as Noel and others have said. And I would just like to see the process be one that's going to work well for you.
Larry, I'm going to echo everything you just said. I think the straw man approach is a very effective one, and many policy studies I was involved in when I was in the shoes of staff, we took that route, worked it through the Planning Commission's Environment Committee, and all the stakeholders who wanted to see the specific proposals could chime in. And was it a big pain in the ass for staff? Absolutely, but we got better policy out of it.
Yeah.
So sorry to be a pain in the ass for you staff people. But I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I would really agree too, because even though I was an environmental engineer with the government and I spent years working on cleanups, you give me a broad question like, what else do we need to add? And it's like, I don't know. I don't, in the other areas like transportation, again, I don't know, but you give me something specific to look at, I can give comment on that.
And there will be, I don't know, like to reiterate, there will be more outreach. These policies, when we get more specifics, they will be put out for comment. So just, we're still trying to be in that gathering phase, not just for, subject matter experts, which I would consider all of you guys on this call are. So, but, wanting to reach the broader county. So
understand, but there's making sure then that when that time comes, it's really well advertised. And as Noel's pointed out, there's enough time. I feel just inundated at times from the county with all these different revisions they're making in all areas of my life. And I can't possibly track it, let alone try to engage on all of it. And yet it'll go on and be established. And then I find out after the fact that, oh my gosh, that's our policy.
Could I just ask out of curiosity if you have received the material from Mary yet on the questions he put together?
I don't believe I have. So
I
haven't think we've seen them.
No.
Okay.
On the matrix?
Yeah.
No, Larry, I've not forwarded that yet.
Okay.
We have some catching up to do with staff for sure. So this is Mary Cortina, Planning Commissioner. I am the point person for the Planning Commission on the Environment and the chair of the Environment Committee. I've heard what you have said. I've heard it from multiple quarters, so I think it's good for staff to hear as well. Just there's a high level of interest and anxiety almost that we have enough time to discuss what policies might be proposed. And that policies that might be suggested for removal, that people have an opportunity to comment as well. And what I like about this approach in this type of a meeting is that you could actually have a dialogue. And by the time that the policy plan language is written and sent out for comment, it may be that EQAC, for example, discusses it among themselves, that Noel and whoever you're representing, that you discuss it separately. but there isn't really necessarily another venue to have policy discussion across stakeholder groups. The land use developers may have a different opinion on something. So I think this is interesting about the straw man approach. And I think it's something that, you know, I've heard you say that you want dialogue about this. So, you know, I'll definitely, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not sure that I have a solution for it. And the project team will have to continue to talk about that. But I have a question about some of the big issues, and maybe it's not appropriate that I weigh in here, but I wanted to just ask about like the carbon neutrality issues and greenhouse gases. You know, there's no real mention of that. There might be some slight mention in air quality or maybe in transportation, but I wondered if that is going to be in the policy plan specifically, that language is added.
We're looking at that. I feel like there's mention in the green building. We've looked at Resilient Fairfax and CCAP and the recommendations in there. Some of those recommendations are addressed through existing policies. So again, it might be a matter of kind of reframing the narrative, so to speak, in the plan that kind of brings these more kind of not recent, but the more forefront issues, call them out better. That this is what we're looking at. Here are the policies that address this, kind of really tie in with the policies that we have or new policies that we'll put in, how they address these larger issues.
And the topic of carbon neutrality as it applies to, you know, buildings or development, to your question about where it would be, I think, you know, Objective 13, where we talk about sustainability and sustainable building practices, would be a natural home for it. Just jumping to mind, but if there's another place that works better, that'll definitely be something that we explore. But
yeah, I mean, the soils and the trees are also carbon sinks.
Yeah, it's a tough one because you look at carbon. There's so many levels you can look at carbon neutrality at. Is it the building? Is it the site? Is it how the site fits into the broader context? Is it the broader context? And if it's the broader context, land use is a small piece of a larger whole, and that's a real that's a lot. I'll be interested in seeing if and how you deal with that. But there are a lot of pitfalls there that you have to watch out for in definition. But interesting question.
And then just the other one is the zero waste plan. It hasn't been adopted, or it has been adopted by the board. I'm not really clear where we are with that one. Do you wait until something more definitive comes out of the board, or are you incorporating that now?
We've reviewed, we've looked at what they've put out in the past years, and we've been looking at it to try and see what connections we can make to land use planning and what could possibly be brought into the comprehensive plan from that.
And it might be the policy plan for public facilities, for example, which isn't even up for review right now, but I don't know how you handle that. That's just a future thing. I mean, the topic of zero waste, if you're going through it and noticing that it demands something else to be updated in the policy plan, you're just taking a note of that, and then that is like a recommendation to the board?
Yes. At this point, yes.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll be quiet and listen. It's 8 o'clock. I really appreciate that everybody came out, that you were at the table here. And I appreciate staff going through this plan, especially identifying some of the areas where the plan is weak. And I wonder if you could go back to that slide. There, areas for improvement, and then areas to address. And so some of the questions, like green buildings, it says topic of upcoming white paper. And so you're doing additional research to see, could you be more specific, whether the policy is going to meet our 2050 goals? Is that the subject of the research?
Yes, the subject of the research is related to changes that would need to happen to our green building policy to help meet the CCAP goals and other targets. So yes, that is focused on researching how we can help advance our meeting of those goals.
Okay, and that would be joint with the CCAP in terms of transportation. Is it also walking that backwards? To say, in order to meet the 2050 goals in CCAP, the two main areas, well, and trees were also in there, but it was buildings and transportation. Is the transportation component also sort of saying we need to do these types of things in order to get to this goal, which translates into this transportation policy?
Our transportation team is also working to incorporate recommendations from CCAP and the other plans into the transportation update.
Okay, and then you'll put those two things side to side and say, this encapsulates what's in our CCAP. To say, here are the policies. For example, if somebody wanted to see, okay, how does CCAP translate into the comp plan? You'll be able to pull out those transportation policies and those land use policies and these green building policies and kind of stack them up and say, this is what we need to get us to this goal. Is that what that white paper will do? Or are each of you doing separate white papers on CCAP?
It's not a white paper on CCAP. It's a white paper on green buildings and sustainable building design. And so related to that is a big part is the CCAP recommendations. And so incorporating that into the paper is what will be happening so that we can make sure any policy recommendations are consistent with CCAP. And for what it's worth, we have been coordinating with OEEC on some of these research areas, specifically related to the resiliency and climate pieces. So I think you won't be disappointed when it comes out. We just need to get through the writing of it.
Okay. Thank you.
I think Renee has her hand up.
If we have time for just two more things that I forgot to mention, I got out of notes. One is water. Thinking about who is responsible for us running out of water. Like if we draw down our water supplies in the Potomac for data centers, who's watching? What is that something that can be put in the policy plan?
There's the public facilities element talks about water supply. County coordinates with Fairfax Water, other providers on monitoring that. The data center policies, that kind of the guidance in the report was to look at potential policies for water supply related to data centers. So that's something that we're
It's
looking
part
at.
of the data centers, but
yeah, it doesn't fit. I mean, it does fit in with the environment, obviously, but kind of a broader context management type speaking, it's sort of a public facilities and other agency type
okay.
Look at. But when we look at land
And
use review, it's more those heavy users with what we would look at, i.e. data centers.
Sure. And then my second comment was getting back to EQCs. One thing that I've come to learn is that while we know in general what an EQC is because of the policy in terms of slopes and such, they're not mapped in any kind of visual way that we could, those of us looking at development plans could say, oh, this is a possibility for actually defining an EQC. So I think it would be nice to, I don't know if this is a policy thing or something else, but be able to map out not only likely EQCs, but also provide a map of current designated EQCs, which really only happens at that time of rezoning. And there's no, it's once and done, and then it's kind of gone. I mean, there are records somewhere that could be put back together, I've heard, but it's certainly not something that's accessible, like, for example, on a GIS map, which I kind of would have expected, right? The same way you can just bring up RPAs. It would be really nice to be able to bring up a map of mapped and designated EQCs and where potential EQCs could be.
I can chime in on that a little bit, Renee, because I don't think I share your recommendation on that. I think this is comprehensive plan policy, and you have to be very careful not to treat it as a regulation. And for instance, the resource protection area lines on a map, that's a regulatory thing, and it's defined very precisely. The EQC policy does have a significant amount of precision that I think helps in the application of it. It helps ensure that we get a good, rigorous application of the concept, but it is not all-encompassing, and there can be additional criteria that can be applied, particularly in headwaters areas, and you really have to judge those areas site by site and look at some of these areas against other site limitations and design goals to see what you can do. And I think if you were to have a potential EQC map, you may overstate the case in some places, and you may miss some things in some cases, and it's a real challenge. As for where EQCs have been applied, Corrine knows this well, because how many years of your life did you spend on that project? The problem is it's very piecemeal. You're correct that EQC is only defined when it's approved through zoning, and you get, I think, a pretty good picture of where they are. I'm not sure how helpful that's going to be in guiding decisions on sites that come in, but I mean, I think that information, I understand, is fairly complete now. I don't know, Corrine, if that project has been quality controlled and all that, so it's you're pretty comfortable with it. But I guess my question is, would, in the context of planning, I think it's very helpful in the context of development review to see what's happened on the site next door, but in the context of broader planning, is that going to be a helpful resource?
Yeah, I think staff generally concurs with what Noel explained. It's kind of since it's a policy and negotiated, you can set yourself up for disappointment if you do try to do something more. So I think Mary.
I was just wondering, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you could explain that a little bit more, because I guess I was just thinking that if you've designated certain areas as EQCs, it seems like that's useful background material for someone to know and understand. And I appreciate what Noel's saying, and I certainly don't disagree with him. But it seems like if you know that you have environmental quality corridors, they're going to extend over multiple properties over large areas, and they're really important for habitat and so forth. And if you don't have the context for where they are, and you plan on development, it seems like you're not going in with both eyes wide open. That's just a quick reaction. So maybe you could explain that a little bit more.
So the policy part of it talks about, it's negotiated, and you can measure it shorter here and longer here, larger area here, and as long as there's, the benefit, you're meeting the purposes. So to put just blanket a layer on, I mean, I just reiterate what Noel said, like you could be missing some areas, you could be leaving or grabbing areas that not necessarily need to be captured. It depends on what else the development is doing and where, what other resources are on the site. The soils, there could be a site where the EQC boundary kind of jogs around, and that's just incredibly difficult to do. Just the time it would take to do that on a broad across the county, to then just have it, could be changed through negotiation and the development entitlement process. Just the bang for the buck. And I mean, and staff, like, we look at that when an application comes in for an entitlement process, which is when that policy would apply. We do look at things we have on the books adjacent, and if it makes sense to ask to get a EQC on that particular property.
So maybe one of the things, just thinking out loud, that might be done is to somehow represent things as being fuzzy on the map, say with a fuzzy boundary or something like that, because it sounds like there's uncertainty in the specificity, and I think that's fair. But the other thing is, it would provide some insight too for something you just said, and that's that sometimes things are negotiated. And so if things are being negotiated, so that the environment loses out, particularly if there's a critical species in a particular area, that's good to know, because if people know that, they might say something. If they don't know, they're obviously not going to say anything. But the more people can understand about the resources, and that the county is doing what they can to protect our resources and make the environment the best they can, that's something people have got to appreciate. And I might be missing something in all of this. I don't know. I mean, no, you've forgotten more than I will ever know about this stuff. So,
and I'm forgetting more every day. Retirement is wonderful.
I'm just thinking out loud here, because I think we want people to appreciate and value what we have, and this is one more way to make that happen.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I understand that there may be some benefit to sort of set expectations at the same time. I mean, some of the information that you're talking about, such as habitat for a rare or endangered species, there may even be some state limitations on what information can be presented publicly. I know that staff has access to some state data layers, but they sign basically a non-disclosure agreement that well, we're not going to make this information public because just publicizing that may endanger it. And so I think that you got to be careful in terms of what you can represent in that regard. But I think the broader concern is, when I was with county staff, we always looked at the environmental quality corridor policy as just that. It's a policy that has no regulatory weight. And while we apply it, I still say we, after 5 years, consistently, and you have to, because if you don't, the development attorneys are very smart, and they're going to know what the precedents are, and they're going to take advantage of them. So you need a lot of specificity in how you define those lines, but it is really something that needs to be defined site by site as cases come in. To suggest, even if you have a map with fuzzy lines and you suggest, well, this is only for policy purposes, are you still going to get people taking their rulers out and scales out and saying, oh, it's a little bit farther than you mapped, a little farther than you applied it, or it's not, it's too wide. The developers, well, it's not mapped that wide on your map. Why should I be giving you this? I think you need to look very carefully at some of the implications of suggesting, is there a suggestion in that map of something this policy isn't? And that's the only caution I would offer on that. Although I recognize, everyone wants to see a map. They want to get a feel. What is this policy and what does it look like? The only possible suggestion I could offer in that regard is kind of look at what we've already protected through the policy.
You can't. There's no map. There's nothing accessible. So maybe that could be something we could put in the policy. Map what we have.
Well, I don't know how, I understand from, this is something that we were working on while I was still there, and I think they're probably still working on it, is trying to capture in a data layer all the EQC agreements that have been reached in some way. I don't know if that is something that's ready for prime time or it has been completed. But that work was underway, and we had interns every year coming in and losing their eyesight on trying to look at these old lines on 30, 40-year-old plans to try to figure it out and capture that and digitize that. I just don't know if that's at the point that it's something that could be collected and presented, but I know that it's something that staff has as a resource and can refer to when sites come in, what's happening nearby. But I don't know if that project ever made it to completion, and if it did, if it's something that's even ready for publication. But that's the only thing I can think of, is you can kind of look at the agreements that have been made, recognizing that the policy itself has changed over time, and that the policy as it was applied in 1985 may have been applied differently in 2015. We used to have a very rigorous 70-acre drainage shed threshold. We would never do an EQC above that. That was the definition for the minor floodplain. Well, now staff is going above that in the headwaters areas, and so you may be getting inappropriate messages from that kind of map as well, simply because the policy has evolved in how it's been applied over time. It's a tough one. I understand what you're asking and why having that visual representation of the policy would have some benefit, but I do think there's some pitfalls that you really have to consider very carefully in how you do that. And I do think, Renee, Corinne, chime in here, because you I think you're wearing glasses because of that project. You worked on that. Is that something that is far enough along where that could be a benefit with all the caveats that you'd have to offer?
I'd have to look into that because, like you said, there were many interns before and after me that worked on that. But I think these are all very good points, and we appreciate the input. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are well past our 8 p.m. end, so I do want to thank everyone for the input. And clearly, from the last 20 minutes here, you see the types of things that we're grappling with and all of the fun stuff that's happening. But we really, really appreciate everyone's time. And I did not make it to switch to the screen with contact information, but I think this group has seen this multiple times. So please please check out our project webpage. Our policy plan is on ENCODE now. And if you'd like to provide comments or potential policy considerations, we do have a central email address set up for this project where we've been tracking all the feedback we received. So with that, Carly, is there anything that I am missing?
I appreciate the dialogue. This was a really, it's unfortunate that we didn't have more people here for this meeting, but the fact that we had a limited number, great discussion. I really enjoyed the back and forth.
Thank you for coming.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Good night.